How are you? Welcome to our critical move in Telesur. Look, what are we talking about? Venezuela continue to focus worldwide attention not only for its effectively fighting against the spread of the coronavirus pandemic, but also because in this same context, the new U.S. plans were plotted to attack the constitutional order in the South American country. What were the White House moves this time around? What is the Trump administration's international standing with this new foiled attempt against the Venezuelan government and people? Let's display the board, and we're making the first move. First, let's listen to how the U.S. Attorney General William Barr announced the new Trump administration slot against the Bolivarian government. As you will hear, the Department of Justice is announcing the unsealing of a superseding indictment filed in the Southern District of New York against 4 defendants, including Nicolas Maduro, as well as the current head of Venezuela's Constituent Assembly, the former Director of Military Intelligence, and a former high-ranking general for their involvement in narco-terrorism. The indictment of Nicolas Maduro and his co-defendants alleges a conspiracy involving an extremely violent terrorist organization known as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC, and an effort to flood the United States with cocaine. As alleged, the Maduro regime is awash in corruption and criminality. Maduro and the other defendants have betrayed the Venezuelan people and corrupted the Venezuelan institution. Let's now listen to the reaction from the Bolivarian Revolution top leadership after these baseless accusations by the U.S. Justice Department. Donald Trump government, in an extravagantly extremist, vulgar, and miserable action, well, they filed a set of false charges, and as 19th century's racist cowboys from the 19th century, they put a price on the heads of revolutionaries willing to fight them in every field. There is clear Alcalá saying that the plot to kill us was directed by Guaidó, that Leopoldo López at the Embassy of Spain knew everything, he was fully briefed and agreed with everything. I have asked our foreign minister to take action on this matter with the Spanish government because Leopoldo López is conspiring to kill Venezuelan political and military leaders from the Spanish embassy in Caracas. I have asked our foreign minister to take immediate action with the Spanish foreign minister, with the Spanish government. With the fugitive from justice, Leopoldo López is using the facilities of the Spanish embassy to hatch plans, and there is the person to attesting to it. Today, the claws of the North American empire are trying to snatch the heart of our nation, making indecent and unfounded accusations against President Nicolas Maduro Moros and myself as Minister of People's Power for Defense and other leaders, military leaders and political leaders. It has been our morality has been precisely the main target in the attack of this perverse enemy, because they see in our morality an obstacle for their nefarious purposes. In the face of these cynical and outrageous attacks that resort to false proofs, slanders, and ignominy, the dignity and decorum of an entire people combine in an impregnable resistance. It is an open secret, this evident attempt to divert international public attention from the calamities that the American people is currently suffering as a result of the failing economy, social, and health policies of a dismal and irresponsible government, unable to ensure their people's health and life. Nothing. We have the evidence that direct relationship, and in a date as close as yesterday, last Wednesday, we saw an appearance on the media, and there we were trying to untie the knots of the over 26 conspiracies hatched in Colombia against Venezuela. So the attempts with drones to assassinate the President of the Republic and the High Command, his wife, and all the cabinet, and that was plotted, designed, and financed in Chinacota in Colombia. And those actions, there are tens, dozens of examples. We have evidence of the direct relationship between Cliver Alcalá Cordones and Juan Guaidó, with Luis Ortega Diaz, with Germán Ferrer, with Hernán Alemán. They all live in Colombia. We have proof of the financing provided by these three people to Cliver Alcalá Cordones' criminal activity in Colombia. We have proof of the existence of three camps. Those camps in Rio Hacha, and each of those camps have a contingent of 90 armed people. So it's approximately 300 mercenary defectors undergoing military training. Already, Venezuela's Prosecutor General has started an investigation, an inquiry into Juan Guaidó and Cliver Alcalá, and to that add other charges that have already appeared. This is a very serious because it makes clear that Cliver Alcalá is the ringleader, and Juan Guaidó authorized one of the plugs, which was going to happen on the darkest night, as was called, by the way, this operation for the killing of Osama bin Laden. And there's also evidence in relation to some other things that have emerged when the new moon happens in the darkest time of March, which is between the 23rd and 25th of March. There is things that are going to happen in Venezuela. Those elements showed up several times in Twitter accounts held by Venezuelan far-right. During the pandemic, the U.S. government, instead of focusing on global cooperation policies in health and prevention issues, they have increased unilateral coercive measures. They have rejected the international community's appeals to lift or soften the illegal sanctions which prevent Venezuela from procuring medicine, medical equipment, foodstuff, and other products. The U.S. government has also banned humanitarian flights from its territory to Venezuela to return hundreds of Venezuelans caught in the economic and health crisis affecting the United States. When the United States begins to use imperialism and arrogance, when they begin to use baseless accusations, arguments full of lies, then you know that we are defeating them. And they cannot beat us in the field of politics. Then they have to resort to hatred. They have to resort to lies, to manipulation, to evil. And then we must be prepared for that. Who said it was going to be easy? Who said here that this revolution was going to be easy? Now, what have been the basis of U.S. accusations against the Venezuelan leaders? Let's see. Last March 26, the United States government lashed out against Venezuela again, this time around using a different modality based on false and slanderous accusations. The State Department said Nicolas Maduro is wanted and a $15 million reward is offered for information leading to his arrest. In this new wave of imperial aggressions, which have taken place in the middle of the world health crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic, other Venezuelan authorities were also mentioned by the State Department. Among them, Diosdado Cabello, President of the Constituent Assembly, and Tarek El Aissami, Vice President of the Economy and Head of the Ministry of Industries and National Production, the President of the Supreme Court of Justice, Michael Moreno, the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrón Lopez, the Minister for Interior, Peace and Justice, Nestor Revelol, and former Major General of the Venezuelan Army, Cliver Alcalá, who was protected by Colombia and transferred to U.S. territory by the DEA last week. According to the statement by U.S. Attorney General William Barr, the political leaders are accused of forming an alleged drug trafficking cartel, which in turn has suspected links since 1999, the year when Commander Chavez came to power, with a former Colombian insurgent guerrilla FARC-EP, now a political party called Alternative Revolutionary Force of the Common. The funny thing is that in its accusation, the United States Justice Department offers a reward to those providing information not only on the whereabouts of these authorities, but also provide value elements that justify such accusation. In other words, the U.S. is in fact accusing these leaders without any proof. It is also curious that during the time which the White House attempts to base its charges, none of the leaders mentioned in the statement held any relevant senior position in the Bolivarian government. Having done this introduction, let's get up to date with the digital media. VTV says the Chief Prosecution Office issues a subpoena to Juan Guaido to appear in court on Thursday over coup d'absent and assassination charges confessed by Cliver Alcala. Venezuela's Attorney General informed on Tuesday that Juan Guaido was being summoned to declare as part of an investigation into Cliver Alcala involved in a recent plot against the life of several top government officials and carry out a coup d'etat in the midst of Venezuelan people to struggle to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Guaido will have to appear before two national prosecutors at the Attorney General's office on Thursday, April the 2nd at 9 a.m. to declare after the confession by Alcalá Cordones after the seizure of a war arsenal in Colombia. The defector and fugitive of the Venezuelan justice admitted that Guaido would have been the mastermind of this action. The subpoena issued by the Attorney General was received by Juan Guaido's head of security on Monday night. William Saab recalled that from Colombia, Alcalá Cordones himself stated that the attempt to smuggle these weapons into Venezuela to deliver them to terrorist groups had been made under direct instructions from Guaido. Likewise, he revealed that the contract for the purchase of these weapons was signed by J.J. Rendon and Guaido himself, and its goal was to eliminate previously selected targets. In what context is this taking place? So the image helps us to deal with the context. With the headlines, the Financial Times called for a moratorium on sanctions against the government of Venezuela. Let's read some paragraph. The Trump administration has decided to redouble its maximum pressure strategy on Mr. Maduro, even as the coronavirus pandemic threatens one of the weakest countries in its most vulnerable area, healthcare. On the contrary, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the organization's Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet, and the European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs, among others, supported the suspension of sanctions while fighting the global epidemic. Thus, the balance of power in international organizations is tilting against Washington. According to Professor of Latin American Studies in the London campus in Melexes, the United States only want war, sanctions, aggressiveness. They are offering nothing to anyone at this serious and dangerous moment, denounces Sputnik, also Secretary of Campaign for Solidarity with Venezuela, VSC, in its English acronym. An agreement between Maduro and the opposition, Guaido, and the Trump administration would allow, according to Sputnik, to unlock frozen funds of $1 million abroad and invest them in the purchase and distribution of medical and hygienic supplies. And I'm going to make a pause and make a recommendation of one article entitled Trump at the Cryptic Threat, Venezuela Again on Foot, by Argentine journalist and writer Stella Caloni, and published in our website in Telesur. In a desperate move, when this terrorist government stumbles to the prevailing chaos in the world and in the United States with the coronavirus pandemic affecting almost 100,000 people, President Donald Trump ordered laying charges against the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his top officials, offering, as if it were a film from the Old West, a $15 million reward for delivering the Venezuelan leader and $10 million each for one of the other accused. Not only this, as in the Far West, Maduro's face is seen in a poster where the reward is offered, which is not only brutal but also criminal, and becomes an affront to mankind in these circumstances. So the current arguments for this resolution of the U.S. justice are already tried and used in every cycle of history, but we cannot overlook that the desire to bring Venezuela to its knees, and with it the rest of Latin America, the United States have established bases throughout the region. Only in Colombia, the U.S. top operating center against the whole region has 9 bases, followed by Panama, Peru, Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, and other nations, including Paraguay and Argentina, where the Southern Command signed several agreements with former President Mauricio Macri. But it is Trump's latest agreements with the President of Brazil the most disturbing right now. In fact, on his visit to the United States, which began on March 18th, Bolsonaro, in his meeting in Florida with Trump, they announced their support to the non-existent and self-proclaimed quote-unquote president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, and for Bolivia's efforts to hold free elections, without clarifying, of course, that those elections would be led under the putschists, including the OAS General Luis Almagro, who ousted President Evo Morales last November. All these preparations are behind the lies of the U.S. Attorney General William Barr, who, without any evidence, accuses Maduro of aiding the dissident Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, allegedly taking the common border when in fact the borders are taken by the Colombian criminal, mercenary and paramilitary experts armed and trained by Israel and the United States and under their direction. From that border, they have committed murders against Venezuelan civilians and military personnel and managed sabotage and destabilization networks. According to the U.S. prosecutor, it's not the Colombian paramilitary groups, nor the DEA, nor the former President Álvaro Uribe, who should be indicted for war crimes against humanity, nor his protege, the President of Colombia, Iván Duque, those who support drug trafficking, as everyone knows. Now it is the time to ask who is watching the U.S. borders, through which so many tons of drugs arrive, while the security forces hunt down criminal migrants and even lock up Latin American children in cages. This fabrication is similar to that of the threat made by the weapons of mass destruction that Iraq had. The argument used to invade the country and kill a million people and take over that nation to later admit that they really were wrong, that there wasn't any weapons of mass destruction, which they had been really informed. Or the arguments for invading Panama in December in 1989, and so many others similar in history. But there's always a but. The confessions of Alcala and the time chosen by Trump for this declaration of war result in a new failure for the unrepentant advice of the ignorant Trump, including war criminals Elliot Abrams and the criminal Miami lobby, in which Marco Rubio stands up. Tens of millions of dollars offered to hunt President and his officials not only violate all international rules, what is already common for this U.S. government, but it also attempts against minimum humanitarian principles, so much so that in the midst of a pandemic which affects millions of Americans who have no health support and who President Trump also condemns to death, while 7 U.S. companies showing the world the ruthless reality of the great world power inside and the real face of capitalism in its sunset. As you see, there's a lot of elements to discuss. So that's why I invite you to give us your opinion on Twitter. With the U.S. accusations, baseless accusations against Venezuela, and a plot in Venezuela to kill the president hatched in Colombia, according to confession by Clive Alcala. What did that fail once again? Give us your views. Let's go to a break and we'll come back.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en ahí.
Dot in the eye. Saturdays. Only on Telesur.
All the truth have been so told. The plot to kill us was that being directed by Guaido. And he said everything. He told everything. And there is the person who makes this case. You can impose any sanctions. You can do anything you want. But you're not going to smuggle your drugs through here. It's non-negotiable. That is non-negotiable. Nothing can surprise us anymore. Any measure that the U.S. Imperialism applies from now on. Well, we lost. We will persist in our Bolivarian genetics to remain loyal to our homeland, to remain loyal to our constitution, establishing a rule of law, of justice, of democratic and social justice, of participatory democracy. That is the model that we ourselves chose for ourselves.
No digo más.
I won't say anything else. Let's go over the context in which this new US government onslaught against Venezuela takes place. The government of Venezuela denounced this new onslaught by the United States in the midst of the world health crisis due to the coronavirus pandemic. Last week, in an interview with the Colombian media outlet, Cliver Alcalá, former general and defector of the Venezuelan army, confessed his participation in the organization of a plot that planned a series of selective killing. He also said that the plot hatched in Colombia was part of an agreement between himself, opposition deputy Juan Guaido, and U.S. officials. Alcalá confirmed that the weapons seized in Barranquilla last 24 March were intended for Robert Colina Ibarra, aka Pantera, to attempt against the stability of Venezuela and assassinate President Nicolas Maduro. After the audio clip was publicized, Venezuela Prosecutor General Tarek William Saab informed the opening of an investigation against Guaido, Alcalá Cordones, among other individuals involved in the coup plot. Venezuela emphasizes that this new onslaught by the U.S. pursues to divert attention from the Trump administration's poor management of the COVID-19 pandemic, even before the country became the world epicenter of coronavirus, exceeding the number of cases reported in China and Italy. This strategy is also implemented after repeated attempts from right-wing sectors that seek to seize power through undemocratic ways. A recent example was the unconstitutional self-proclamation by Juan Guaido as president, as well as the so-called guarimbas or violent street actions and failed coup attempts against the leadership of the Bolivarian Revolution. From the moment when Commander Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999, investigations have shown that all these actions are being financed by the White House and other UN non-governmental organizations. And we go to the United States to start our analysis. In Washington, D.C. is Leonardo Flores, a political analyst and coordinator of campaigns in Code Pink. And also in D.C. is James Early, member of the Institute for Political Studies in the U.S. Capitol. Welcome, both of you, to our critical move. Leonardo, if you allow me, I will start with James. James, greetings to you on behalf of our critical move. We see that the U.S. does not waste any time to continue its onslaught against Venezuela. How do you see that? Well, the truth is that despite the context of this health crisis, it is a constant in the bipartisan policy, U.S. policy. We have to understand that it is not only the Trump administration, but it is also in cooperation with some Democratic lawmakers, also in the state of Florida, with Dana Shalala, and Deborah Wasserman, and also other congressmen in cahoots with other Cuban American congressmen against the Venezuelan government. This is a very dangerous step. Uh, this attempt to kidnap or kill the elected leader of the Venezuelan people. It's very dangerous to remove President Maduro, but also to interfere in the progressive policies of this government and the transnational policies, especially in the Venezuelan policies to Latin America and the Caribbean. So this is a very dangerous move. Uh, this is a constant of the vulgarity and the deprivation by the U.S. bipartisan policy in the United States. So we have to understand that. We have to understand communication with U.S. Civil society sectors with Venezuela. Because they have to criticize this policy of assassination. Speaking of bipartisanship, let's not forget the applause, the ovation Juan Guaido received when he was introduced at the U.S. Congress. Thank you so much. Stay with us. Let's bring Leonardo Sierra. Leonardo, since you have a close link with campaigns, with COVID campaigns, so necessary within the United States, it would be good to recall, as part of this escalation of the U.S. Administration, what happened once at the time with the Venezuelan embassy in D.C., where you had, let's say, decisive participation in defending this diplomatic venue. And many have been the attempts to boycott the national development of the Bolivarian Revolution. Leonardo, let me hear you. Thank you for the invitation. And you're right, you're very right. This is a multi-dimensional part of the attacks of the U.S. government, both using financial means and legal actions, and also in the framework of international law, because what happened at the embassy was a complete violation of the Geneva agreements, and this was something was unheard of. Then we go to James Early, who is accompanying us from the U.S. Capitol. James, you are mentioning the moment in which these accusations arise of coup and assassination, which are major words, very dangerous words. So you were making reference in your words to something that cannot be overlooked by our viewers, and that has to do with the U.S. standing vis-a-vis the COVID-19 pandemic. So please update us on this, because it is said that they are the #1 country in terms of number of cases of COVID-19, and the behavior of the U.S. authorities leave much to be desired. As an American who is not well, what is taking place in the U.S. is something that even that we call ourselves the most important country in the world, we are really it is the practice of democracy. What we're doing is that the workers and the transportation workers, health workers, in the hospital workers are the front line in the battle against this pandemic. But despite that, the resources are being earmarked for those richest hospitals in the U.S., not the workers, not the common people. And that actions by the government is not, but it's also on the part of the Democratic incapacity of the Democratic Party to face this the threat and the majority of Americans in the context of this onslaught against Venezuela. Despite the context linked to this pandemic, is a constant policy beyond this context of the pandemic. This attack against Venezuela, the U.S. are not going to allow, from the perspective of the elites of both parties, they won't have Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua or Iraq or Syria or China or Russia there, and other countries that have called for, and the United Nations have called for, relax to stop these war actions against these countries. It is an example of the lack of humanity of the U.S. policy. And here in the United States, the citizens, we must establish better communication with the Venezuelan civil society. Despite our views of the socialist government of Maduro, but the main issue is the survival of the American people. And for us, in solidarity, in international solidarity, at these times of crisis, to fight the vulgarity of our policy that reflect crimes against humanity. Thank you so much, James. And just to end, Leonardo, within the U.S. borders, how has the U.S. media reinforced their campaigns against Venezuela? Well, mainly with the coronavirus pandemic, there's a space to speak about Venezuela. In fact, in these days, several senators are requesting the lifting of sanctions during this pandemic, but also, especially with the charges by the U.S. Department for narco-terrorism. There's a lot of people who are doubting. There's a lot of lack of coherence of Trump's policy, because on the one part, there's a lot of nonsense. Because the $5 million for that is public, that is only for President Maduro. Second, to try to pull up incentives and then to persecute something fallacious. What it shows is that it's a contradiction in the U.S. policy, and this policy is criticizing, because they say they wonder how it is possible that you can attack the government of Maduro and charges of narco-terrorism, and then request that is ousted to start a transition government. So this is that type of incoherent ideas. It reveals the incompetence of President Trump's in foreign policy, of U.S. Lack of coherence vis-a-vis Venezuela. We are reflecting in our critical move. Thank you so much, Leonardo. Thank you, James Early, for your time in our show today. We're going to a break, but remember that we have a question where you can become an analyst, so that you can read the strategic move. The U.S. launched baseless proof against the U.S. Venezuelan authorities. It's a coup d'etat plot, as confessed by Cliver Alcala prior to his detention, quote-unquote detention, because the images were telling. Once again, it failed. Why? Give us your views. When we come back, I'm going to be speaking with an expert, a political analyst, but also an expert in legal sciences. So from that perspective, we're going to be doing our analysis in just a few minutes. Venezuela has been harassed by a number of actions launched by the White House with the purpose of generating a climate of destabilization to overthrow constitutional President Nicolas Maduro. Let's recall some of these actions from 2014 to date. With Donald Trump's arrival at the White House, the increasing escalation of aggressions against Venezuela, the New York tycoon, advised by far-right sectors from the state of Florida, implemented a strict economic blockade that has cost Venezuela $116 billion in losses. The reiterated U.S. government aggressions against the Bolivarian Republic cover sectors such as transport, telecommunications, several industries, power generation, education, and basic services. After the elections of the Constitutional National Assembly in July 30, 2017, which ended months of violent acts by the Venezuelan right wing with the so-called guarimbas, the U.S. government enforced economic sanctions against President Maduro as punishment for not calling off elections. Similarly, the U.S. Treasury Department expanded the so-called financial sanctions against Venezuelan companies established in Executive Order 13,808 to prevent the rescheduling of Venezuela's debt, as well as the PDVSA one acquired before 25th August 2017. That same year, the U.S. government prevented the arrival in Venezuela of a cargo of 300,000 doses of insulin paid by the Venezuelan government. The Citibank boycotted the purchase of this important supply. The import of 18 million boxes of subsidized food from the local supply committees to the population program known as CLAP was interrupted due to obstacles by the United States financial systems. In 2018, the executive order ratified by Donald Trump in August 2017 extended the scope of the one issued in 2015 by Barack Obama, therefore giving continuity to the prohibition of any American citizen, institution, or company to acquire Venezuelan debt or properties and assets belonging to the Bolivarian government in the United States, including the investments derived from PDVSA. A number of actions occurred in 2019 with the support of the U.S. government, just to mention a few. The self-proclamation by opposition lawmaker Juan Guaido as president in charge of Venezuela, the failed entry of alleged humanitarian aid, which was a media circus against the Bolivarian Revolution orchestrated from the Colombian border, and the theft of assets from the Venezuelan oil subsidiary Citgo, as well as the occupation of the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Trump administration has to increase its unilateral coercive measures against Caracas, while rejecting the international calls to lift these so-called sanctions and facilitate the purchasing of this medicine for the Venezuelan people. A geopolitical analysis is what we have to do now after this introduction. That's why we invited Dr. Maria Alejandra Diaz, constitutional attorney, member of the National Constitutional Assembly, and thank you so much for the attorney. Thank you for the invitation. I was telling the Dr. Maria Alejandra Diaz while we were watching this note that we have to see those who are the visible faces and those faces behind the scene. And I want to start by that, this geopolitical analysis. If you look at the constitutional history of the United States, which is very interesting, by the way, which marked from 1787 with this anti-British parliamentary position, a new way to see the Constitution and the role of the judge in the United States. But from Madison, I implemented the judge as an actor, not as part of the law, but in the courts that decide, which can regulate, in light of the Constitution, the acts of the legislative power, in this case, the parliament. So these are two important things that are these views in the United States: the control of constitutionality and the presidents as source of law. So in the United States, there is a president from 1876 that's called no to capture or no to detention. It means that they justify uh, that you capture by force, even extraterritorially, anyone with the purpose of, and it's justified to put this person to trial. So thinking of the denunciation by that he even is offering an amount of money for the capture or arrest of the president of the republic and other ministers and military personnel. Now, why do I start by that? And then, in addition, they say that give us information to sustain our accusation, because they have no proof. So looking at all of this precedent comes from the times of the view of the neocons, hawks. Now, the Trump government is not homogeneous. He's surrounded by neocons. Who's William Barr? He comes from being an acolyte from Reagan and then from Bush father. He is the one justifying his legal opinion to support this president that then was ratified in 1954, even in 2004, to justify the extraterritoriality of detention. So what do these neocons do? That in addition, they try to impeach Trump, and that impeachment, we don't know what was negotiated behind doors. And he allowed that William Barr, who's a dark character representing the interests of the neocons, and he was making a gesture to these sectors. We don't know that. We cannot guess. The domestic policy of the U.S. is not linear. It's not linear because it confront to that to those sectors, because he's saying bring the U.S. back to glory from reindustrialization, and that face off with China, because China is the new face of globalization, and we have to say clearly. And then what do they represent? Protectionism and the deglobalization. That's not only the United States. There's a very serious analysis by Álvaro García Linera for many years, making a content analysis of the measures by both countries, but also in practical terms, how U.S. capitals are moving. The U.S. was deprived of economic contents, because the greatest companies, by looking at the very cheap labor costs from China, they migrated there, because that's the way capitals are. They have no interest, they have no homeland, they have nothing. So internally, Trump is playing a game, and in this game is Venezuela, because Venezuela would allow him to control a block of power in America and to have a counterweight to China and Russia. Is he acting as a politician or a businessman? A political negotiator, because he needs to win the elections in Venezuela. Could be perhaps the standard that he's offering in order to be re-elected for those sectors. But these sectors exercise a strong influence in Florida. We know even what happened in Florida, that they manipulated the elections in that state. He lost elections. The Democratic candidate lost elections against Bush and in Florida. And Florida is considered a swing state, so it has an influence over the elections. So there lies the majority of anti-Cuban and anti-Venezuelan sectors historically. So we cannot expect that he's not playing games or without taking in mind his electoral interest. And he has a target that he has to comply. That in his vision is to protect his nation, to make it great again, and to make it in the only empire So he's not asking for multipolarity, but unipolarity. While, for example, Russia, which I believe is the country which we have to study more carefully, especially its philosophers, and its President Vladimir Putin, because this is proposing poles of power which can be balanced. So we can see this in black and white terms. So that behavior by the US is repetitive. From 1876, they have this precedent which allows them to act that way. In 1989, an investigation was opened in terms of Noriega's transactions. And the one who was called, summoned to declare, to say that was illegal, was William Barr himself, the same character. So he's there as a factor of balance of the neocons against the Trump administration. So we cannot kid ourselves. We know that this gentleman represents the neocons. So what happens in that investigation? The U.S. Congress itself did not agree with this precedent to justify that through domestic law, a country could break the law of international law, to violate the UN Charter and violate the U.S. Constitution itself. So William Barr was under investigation between 89 and 91. So some of those who investigated, there were some journalists that followed that on this case, but the statement by some senators who at the time were pressuring him to deliver the full legal basis opinions. But he never surrendered that. He never delivered that. But who's William Barr representing? Representing Bush, Reagan, the neocons, the legalists who want to redraw the map of the world with the new capitalism, but with deeper hunger, with more poverty, so that there's no one who can stand up to them. Because in the long run, after this pandemic situation, exacerbated by the media, which have become a reality, without denying that it is happening. Because imagine what happened in 2002 with the Twin Towers. There was an event that changed the U.S. security doctrines and justified the U.S. Congress violating its own constitution, declared that the Patriot Act was legal, and they violated the U.S. Constitution. That was done by the legalists. So who can tell me that this event, what it's showing is the game of cards at the world level between powers, where Venezuela plays an important role because of its resources. So we have to understand what is behind of the persecution against the Chavismo, because with today's offer from the neocons groups today, because we have to get rid of Guaido and Maduro, and let's do an election with the transition government. And how necessary is Guaido now? Now today, they revealed that he can be sacrificed with today's decision to propose a different game where Guaido is no longer present. So simply, he has been discarded. So there are some media in neighboring countries that is saying that Juan Guaido had accepted the request by the U.S. to set aside. Juan Guaido is just a puppet. The issue of Juan Guaido accepting, no, there's no way to. He's just an employee of the U.S. He's a traitor. He's a traitor. He betrayed his homeland. He's serving the darkest interest of those groups. And we have to wonder who is having Citgo, who took the money. Because, see, that the accusation against Maduro and the leadership of Chavismo, it has different purposes, not only election, but also the crimes for which he has been indicted, not drug trafficking. These are transnational crimes. So these are crimes that must be persecuted by all countries according to the agreements, according to which sovereign countries have signed in terms of our own sovereignty. So everyone agrees that the leitmotif, everyone agrees that the justification is fine, drug trafficking and terrorism, but they build a case, they build an event from the media, from the power to implement by force, not by law. So the international relations, the UN Charter, or the U.S. Constitution, but by force of imperial power. So from 1848, we have established that there is a new law. So who is Guaido? He's just a piece, a sacrificable piece, a sacrificable lamb, and that for the moment that the plans will not be materialized. And also we have to revise internally the case when they seized the weapons for the operation that was going to take place to overthrow President Nicolás Maduro. So when they saw that they were discovered, this group of mercenaries, because they are a danger, because they are outsourcing the war with the full knowledge of Colombian authorities and not American authorities. So this is not a fantasy, but through this doctrine, not capture but detention, they justify the payment, and that way you divide in the domestic forces. But anyone who's is crazy enough and has a weapon could be tempted to do that. So the internal situation becomes even more complicated, more conflictive by virtue of this reward that they just put out. So this is the behavior of the U.S. authorities, but especially of these neocon sectors, which are the most recalcitrant against Venezuela, because for them Venezuela is like a surprise. But Venezuela is a prize, but for their means, for their ends, for their imperialist long-term ends, where the way they see the area of influence, and that Venezuela cannot be touched by Russia and China. So we are perhaps facing a new division of the world. Just a question just before we finish. Answer in 30 seconds. Why these plans continue to fail once and again? Because the security system are being very effective. Because there's a people that decided the all or nothing. Within the Constitution, everything. Outside the Constitution, nothing. So this is within the DNA of the Venezuelan people. And it's very important for Trump to understand that. Trump must understand that he has to negotiate not only with Maduro, but with the people that wants the same as him, which is benefit for the people. On equal footing, not as subjects, not as slaves. We want equal conditions from one sovereign country to another. You are fighting for your country, so we are fighting for ours. We are patriots, and this is in our veins. This is running in our veins. Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you for your words in Critical Move. Quickly, let's go to conclusions.
Los nuevos planes revelados por fichas del propio gobierno estadounidense no hacen sino patentizar cómo la Casa Blanca no ceja, incluso en tiempos de pandemia, en su histórico intento de desestabilizar a Venezuela.
in their attempts
De
to
manera que
destabilize Venezuela.
lanza la administración
So
Trump
the
una
US Trump
cortina de humo
administration
para
puts up a
tapar
smoke
su
screen
ineficiencia en
to
políticas
cover up its
sanitarias
inefficient health
versus la
policies
efectiva labor
versus
desplegada
the
por las
effective
máximas
work done by the
autoridades
top
venezolanas
Venezuelan
contra la
authorities against COVID-19.
cifras, como
The
decía,
figures,
hablan por
as
sí
we
solas,
say,
pero
are
también
very
se hace
telling.
un guiño
But
el
also, the
magnate
New York
neoyorquino
tycoon
a la
tries
extrema derecha
to
del
curry
gobierno
favor with the
venezolano
Cuban
en la
Venezuelan
Florida,
far-right sectors
porque
in
ese
Florida
vocero lo
for
decía
electoral
mi
process,
invitada.
as our guest was saying. So you wonder, why isn't the empire successful in its attempts? Among other reasons, because of the clumsiness of its tycoons, but especially for the monolithic unity shown in the Bolivarian slogan, loyal always, traitor never. We're closing with our board today. Thank you so much.